What's up, YouTube? We're back. Today we're going to be talking about rainwater harvesting. So, rainwater harvesting, what's the big deal, right? Why do we have to harvest the rainwater? Um, so here's the deal. Humans, we need a lot of water, not only for our personal use, but also a big part of this is for our landscapes. This is going to be our lawns, our trees, our gardens, our farms, all this kind of thing. And when it comes to supplying water for these things, usually we ignore the free water that falls out of the sky. And so that's the whole idea here. Let's talk about why we're ignoring this resource and instead investing so many other resources to pump water from deep in the ground or build these reservoirs to supply our water. And while these are good systems, they are finite resources, and we still have water falling for free out of the sky that isn't being used. And so that's why we're going to talk about rainwater harvesting. So you might be thinking, what's the big deal here? The rain is already falling on all the plants. They get watered every time it rains. So what's the big deal about harvesting the rain? But the thing is that we have a lot of rain that falls onto surfaces that aren't plants, whether that's our roofs or our streets. These are surfaces where the water is going to flow off of those into something else. And so in these situations, we can actually use this water and direct it towards the plants that need it, so that the soil can absorb more water than it would have with just the rainfall that hit it. We're actually going to concentrate all this rain and supply it where it's needed. Let me tell you about Brad Lancaster. Brad Lancaster is the author of the book series Rainwater Harvesting in Drylands and Beyond. And in this series, he basically goes into depth about a variety of methods of how we can harvest rainwater. His main idea being that we need to slow the flow of the rain so that it can infiltrate into the soil as close as possible to where it landed. One way he does this is by cutting street curbs. So when it rains, we direct our rainwater to the street where it flows along the curbs on the side of the street. And what he does is cuts the curb so that the water can flow into an area where he has trees and shrubs and that kind of thing planted. So instead of the water draining away, it can be directed to where there's soil. And in Tucson, Arizona, where he did this, it was actually illegal at first to do, but he did it anyways. And by doing it, he proved that this concept can actually work. And with that, the regulations were actually changed to where now the city promotes rainwater harvesting because they understand the benefits of it. I'm going to try to find some diagrams from his book that we can talk about. Okay, so here's our first one. This is the conventional idea of rainwater harvesting, and this is a good thing, but it's just not the only method there is. So as you can see, this roof, about 9,000 gallons of rain fall on this roof every year. And they've directed that into a tank that's 3,000 gallons. And as you can see, the tank can be used to turn on this hose and water the garden. And then also the overflow for the tank automatically flows to the garden. So this is rainwater harvesting at its core. You're taking this free 9,000 gallons of water and using it to water your garden, so that we don't have to obtain water elsewhere that's going to require more energy and more infrastructure, basically. So now let's look at an example of some earthworks. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so here's a prime little example of curb cutting and basins. So as you can see, the curbs right here have a notch cut into them, that allows this water that's flowing down the street to go into these basins and water these trees. And because of this, the trees are going to receive more water than what actually fell on them directly. And that's going to help the trees to grow bigger, grow more healthy, that kind of thing. Okay, I really like this one. It's an example of how we could design a parking lot to harvest rainwater. I really like this example because this is an example of a space that everyone uses every day, and if we implemented this design, it could just make our lives actually more convenient and more comfortable. So as you can see in the top example, this is how our parking lots are usually designed. Not with the dead trees, but it's just an example. So in most parking lots, the curb is elevated from the pavement you're driving on. And so when it rains, the water is just drained away from the parking lot to maybe some sort of storm drain off to the side or at a low point in the parking lot. And that results in this rainwater not being used. But on the bottom half of the diagram, we see an alternative where the curbs are cut and the grade of the soil is lower than that of the pavement. And what that results in is that when it rains, the rainwater can be directed to the trees so that they can receive more water. This is going to help the trees to grow more quickly because they're receiving more water. And in turn, these trees are going to provide more shade to the parking lot and make it a more pleasant place to be. And this is the kind of thing that I really just love when it comes to sustainability, because so often people see sustainability as making personal sacrifices for the sake of the future, right? But that's not the way I see it, and I really try not to live that way. I'm not trying to make sacrifices for my own personal comfort for some abstract vision of the future. I want us to build systems that actually work. We need to build systems that serve our human needs and benefit us. And this is a perfect example of that. This is a kind of system that is going to grow and become better over time and continue to serve human needs. It's designing a system that doesn't require sacrifice by anyone. It just requires some intelligent design put into it. And as a result, we get a system that serves human needs and makes us more comfortable in the long term. Trees serve so many different purposes for us, and they're so important because not only are they providing this clean air, but they're also reducing the amount of wind that will come through here. They're actually slowing down the wind and making it maybe a more pleasant place to be. So all of these benefits just because we decided to harvest the rainwater. And it doesn't cost whoever's maintaining this, it isn't going to cost them anything more to harvest the rainwater because they're not going to have to supply as much water. Okay, so I don't want this video to be too long, so we'll probably just stop there with the basics, but you get the idea. It's about taking water where it's needed and allowing it to soak into the soil and grow plants that benefit humans. So that brings up the question, what can we actually do about this? Because oftentimes it feels like not much. You know, I don't really have a say about how parking lots are designed. I don't have a say in what people do with their landscapes. If they decide to grow a lawn or harvest rainwater, there's not much I feel I can do about that. That's my dilemma here is I feel so motivated to implement this kind of thing and live in a sustainable way, but I don't feel like I have the power to do it. I don't control any specific piece of property. I'm not in charge of how we design the cities, and there's many aspects of it I also don't understand. So what can we really do? You know, it's installing a massive rainwater tank is expensive, or redoing your whole landscape is also expensive. And so I feel like we need to start small here. And for a lot of people, I think that's going to start with gardening and growing food. Gardening is just such a good entry point into sustainability, because it connects so many of these different things: using water responsibly, growing healthy food, the cycles of life, all of that kind of thing. So if you have access to somewhere to garden, then just give it a shot. Plant a couple edible plants into your landscape, or maybe you decide to build a garden box that you can grow food in for multiple years, that kind of thing. And maybe you don't have access to an area to garden. And in that case, I would say volunteer at a community garden, because these places are doing so much good for our communities. So if you have a community garden nearby, I would really recommend you check it out and volunteer there. The other thing we can do is advocate for this kind of infrastructure. And it's not often going to be at the top of our ballots some question about, should we harvest rainwater, you know? It's not something we might have direct control over, but I will say that in general, we should be involved in local politics, because local politics is where this kind of change really happens. It's not going to happen at the national level. There's not going to be some federal law that mandates that every single city design a rainwater harvesting system. You know, that's just not going to happen. But at a local level, cities and counties can design systems that work for their climate and their needs, because every area is so different. And local politics is also a place where your voice counts so much more, because the elections are so much smaller. And, you know, local governments do have a lot of influence over this kind of thing, because they can set up rebates for building better infrastructure. For example, some cities do a rebate where converting lawn into a drought tolerant landscape you can actually get paid for that. So this kind of thing exists, and we need to vote for the kind of people that implement these systems, because we need to see more systems that just make sense. And we need to be building more of these so that we can have a more resilient and healthy future. Anyways, I hope this was a good intro to rainwater harvesting. If this is a topic you're interested in learning more about, I'm going to be reposting one of Brad Lancaster's videos that I think is a great intro to rainwater harvesting. So if you're interested, check out that video. Just search up rainwater harvesting on YouTube, see what you can learn. It's worth learning about. So thanks so much for watching.